The end goal of what we're trying to do is really care for patients. At the end of the day, we're in a healthcare business that our result needs to be the best for the patient that's in front of us so that they are well taken care of and ultimately get what they need.
This is Growth in Dentistry, a dental intelligence podcast, where we ask the question, what does growth in dentistry mean to you? I'm Steve Jensen, a dated dental nerd and your host.
Welcome, everyone. Super excited for another episode of the podcast today. Now, before I jump in, as always, huge shout out to the marketing team at Dental Intelligence. Dental Intelligence sponsors this podcast week after week after week, and there is so much work that goes into it. Now, they have an offer that I announce every single time, and that is, if you haven't checked out Dental Intel for a while, or if you've never checked it out, you can get a $50 gift card just for doing a demo of the software. There's been some new releases lately. We've updated some of our reporting to add new metrics in there. You can create customized reports in scorecards. You can manage your insurance claims. That's a hot topic right now. Our insurance claim solution is working. You can push them through. There are tools to be able to get insights to see how are things going in my business, where can I improve, where are they going great, and many, many other awesome features. So check it out if you haven't. It's an amazing solution helping thousands and thousands of practices out there in the industry. Now, without any further ado, I want to jump straight into our podcast for today. Our guest is Eric, and I'm going to screw up your last name. I should have asked before we jumped on. How do you pronounce your last name?
It's just Pastan.
Pastan. Because I was going to go with Pastan, like Pastan.
Yeah, no ethnicity whatsoever. We like to fly under the radar.
So Pastan. So welcome, Eric, to the podcast. Now, just so everyone knows, Eric's background. Eric got into dentistry back in 2006, and you may have heard of this dental group called Dr. Dental. They grew to 45 locations and sold, and that was Eric's experience. So you can imagine one of the cool things I love talking about people like Eric is, what does it take to scale? And what lessons can small 1-2 location practices, 3 location practices learn from these groups that are 45, 100 plus locations big? Because I'll tell you this, I've been at Dental Intelligence now for 6 years. And when I joined, we were just little. Like we had maybe 1,000 customers. So like for a dental practice, if you think about it, it's like, okay, cool. Like I can relate with that. I've got 1,000 customers. You had 1,000 customers. And now we're over 10,000. And the game changes. In the early stages, you can focus on like heroics, and one person can get cover a lot of like systematic sins, and you can rely on like directives from a leader instead of like objectives for the whole group to decide, okay, how are we going to accomplish this task? And there's a lot of things you learn as you scale. That you don't have to wait until you have 50 locations to learn them. That's the point I want to make. So I'm super excited to have Eric on today. Eric, I would love if you share like a little bit of your background. Why did you get into dentistry? Why have you stayed in dentistry? Because, you built this DSO, not a dentist, correct?
Correct.
And so not a dentist. You don't it's not like you have, tons of debt forcing you to stay here where you're like, okay, well, I've got to use my trade to like stay in this thing. So why do you stay in dentistry? And tell us a little bit about what you're up to now, and then we'll kind of chat and give some value to the listeners.
Yeah, for sure. And first of all, let me say thank you for having me on.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. We have been using Dental Intel with our clients for a long time. And I think we both sit here as complete data junkies.
For sure.
None of these decisions can be made, whether you're a single or small group or a larger group, without understanding the data. And I think we both really agree on that. Coming into dentistry in 2006, having no dental background whatsoever, I was an English teacher in Central America for a while, and then came back and got into banking up here. And what I realized quickly is that I wanted to own something that I could make a difference and grow. And that's where, that's where my passion was. And so when the opportunity to come into dentistry presented itself, and, there are barriers to entry, meaning I wasn't a dentist, so I had a dental partner that I came in with. I realized quickly that retail, at that time, what we were calling retail dentistry, which almost back in 2006 was almost a novel concept, was an opportunity to deliver patient care and really connect with patients in a meaningful way and have teams that really drove towards positive results. And so that's where my passion really started, was to be helping people. And as it grew from that individual office in downtown Boston, as we started to grow it over time, what we realized, and one of your prior points was that, you really, once you stop being able to literally put your hand on someone's shoulder every day, you had to start to develop systems and understand the data and put into place what success is going to look like, and then start managing to that. So enabling your teams to be able to be independent, but also have oversight so that they understood what the results were supposed to look like in order to consider this a success. It was a great run. We built up to 45 offices. We ultimately sold in 2019, having gone from one office to 45. So throughout that path, we centralized a lot of our systems and really took advantage of those scale. And so when I came over to Skytale, I really bring with me considerable amount of experience as we apply that to the KPIs and the financial metrics that we use in order to work with kind of that middle market of client in helping them understand their data and then implement it in a meaningful way that will drive to the result they're looking for.
Yeah, that's great. Now I'm gonna hit you with, is it okay if we just jump in and I start grilling you a little bit?
Let's do it.
Okay, so Eric and I are both data nerds. I think that's going to be clear to everyone. So I'm going to hit you with a data question. This one's a little bit of a curveball, so I'm interested to hear some of your thoughts. So, Eric, you start looking at a practice or a group from a data perspective. Where do you start? There are like several data sources. There's stuff in the practice management software. There are financials. And me with my like MBA, I like accounting background. I've always really loved looking at their financials of a business. And then there's lots, now that I've been at Dental Intel for 6 years, there's lots that I can learn from that as well. So I'm interested to hear, like, what are your top couple of things where you're like, okay, when I first look at a business, these are the first couple of things I look at and why? I'm actually very interested to see. And then like, what is the steps we take from looking at those things,
Sure. I think from a Skytail perspective, we do a complete full day meeting with our clients to really understand their operations and then take a look at their financials. Really, the first place that I go to is their P&L, right? To see how healthy is it. I look at the percentages that they have in all of these categories to understand, do we have do we have any issues? Is it an expense issue? Is it a revenue issue?
Yeah.
If it's an expense issue, we dive into where are we fundamentally flawed in our approach and those expenses that we have within our organization. Or if it's a revenue issue, we go to dental intelligence and look to see those KPIs that are going to be indicative of where we see issues. And now when it's a multi-location client, it's going to be different in different offices. So it really comes down to identifying what are the drivers of success and what are the challenges within each individual office that we can identify, and then think about the change that we can apply to this and where our goals should be set going forward. 9 times out of 10, we find that there aren't budgets set out. So there is no goal. We're just operating as a dental office without any, and kind of untethered. And we're just looking at, hey, what do our collections look like? And we're either collecting more or less than the month before the 6-month trend or the year over year, which is great to start there. And that's where most offices do start. But really, as you become an organization, a DSO, or just a small group, you really have to take that next level of understanding what are the drivers behind success. How can we flip that paradigm from revenue to profitability? And then how do we assess how to become more profitable?
Yeah, and I want to call something out. As you were saying this, I just kept having the same thought. Something that you brought up earlier, and then again, just barely. I want people to hear this. It is 100% possible for you to have really poor systems and a charismatic attitude and make good money in dentistry. Like that still is absolutely possible. And the question then becomes, okay, if I can do that, Steve and Eric, if I can make decent money, like what's coming and hitting my bank account, like I'm comfortable with that without those systems, why go through the headache and of like putting systems in place, putting in control measures, understanding those levers. Like, why would I even take that step, Eric? I have some thoughts, obviously, but I would be interested to hear yours, because
Yeah, I mean,
like
listen,
intriguing and wonderful to take that step, but I'm interested to hear what you think.
yeah, I mean, I can think of 100 reasons why. I mean, typically it starts with the fact that I'm talking to someone that's entrepreneurial in the way
Yeah.
that they're approaching this business, and they're approaching dentistry from a business perspective. So they want to grow, they want to scale. We want to look to see what their organization can become and ultimately be worth, whether it's going to be a transaction or just because they want to grow something over time. So, to leave that on the table, if you will, and not develop your systems holds you hostage to the performance of any individual within your organization and the potential loss that might occur if they leave. One of the things that we want to protect from is this house of cards, right? And so that example that you kind of explained is really dependent on people being self-motivated and taking it all into their own hands without even necessarily us understanding the why behind it. So there's a lot of danger there. And you look at the marketplace today, it's impossible to hire. We're talking about retention tools to keep our people. All of that kind of goes out the window if you don't understand how to measure success and understand how success is happening within your organization. So I think if you want to be a true business owner, you need those systems. You need to understand why you're being successful in order to capitalize on it in the future and protect from that downside of someone leaving and going somewhere else or retiring or whatever those dots are. But you want to be able to understand why you're successful, and then once you understand why, it's how can we be more successful? How can we not only protect ourselves, but how can we improve?
Yeah, there's a John Maxwell quote that comes to my mind often, and he says, "I believe everyone chooses how you approach life. If you're proactive, you focus on preparing, right?" And so this is like, I'll frame that as like folks who are willing to go through this thought and business process of like creating systems. They're proactive, and that lifestyle is going to feel far more controlled and far more predictable. And then he says, if you're reactive, you end up focusing on repairing. So once again, everyone chooses how you approach life. If you're proactive, you focus on preparing. If you're reactive, you end up focusing on repairing. So for those out there that are listening, if you're thinking like, yeah, like my daily life as a doctor owner or as a manager, business manager, just feels like kind of chaotic. Like I'm never sure what the next day is going to be or the next couple of weeks. I'm not ready if like curveballs get thrown at me, or if curveballs get thrown at me, I can handle them, but I'm not like, I'm stressed out all the time. Then that's probably a sign that you're in a situation where your systems aren't like clearly set for you. I think another one, you mentioned this, kind of like losing a team member. Another good, I think, like check mark to say, hey, have I set up good systems? And that is, if I were to have to remove myself from this business today, could we plug someone else, some other competent person in, and have that business continue to run in a similar way it's been running, right? That's always kind of like the dream: predictable revenue and systems where we can plug new people in. Like that's a great goal to have. Now, I say that, and it might sound like so easy. I understand that's not like incredibly easy to do. That takes time, that takes skill and some background. So it looks like you've got a thought. I'm interested to hear what
Well,
you're.
but there's ways to prepare, right?
Yeah.
And so the biggest way to prepare for that is the budget. So, what we like to do is have 2 years budgeted out from a KPI perspective. So we understand the revenue that we're expecting to come in next month and every month between now and 2 years from now, but also who's supposed to contribute to it, where our expenses are going to be, and so that you can line up that expectation to the result that happened and be able to peel it back and say why, so that you don't become kind of defenseless and chaotic. You become very pointed, and you can identify exactly, okay, this is what we thought was going to happen. It either went and accelerated beyond that for a reason that we can track back to, or we didn't get there, and this is the reason why. So I think, in order to understand your business, you have to be prepared in some way. And for me, I think it's about budgeting, tracking your KPIs. You have kind of the data at your fingertips using dental intelligence. And so the question becomes, here's our goal. Here's what dental intelligence is telling me. Are we tracking, within a certain variance of that, or do we need to step back and look at why we're not? And then if we're not, what do we need to do to get back there?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I'd be interested, Eric, thinking about your experience. You had, a good chunk of years at Dr. Dental from, ground up to 45, which is incredible. So I'm sure there's like some experiences there. And then experience working with clients, like helping them identify, stuff in data, whether it's a P&L or revenue data out of the practice management software, using dental intelligence. I'd be interested to hear, like, what are some of your favorite moments where you're like, hey, this is a common problem I see that I help folks solve, and here's kind of some thoughts around solving it. Or, maybe recently it's like, what do you see practices struggling with right now? Post-COVID, tight financial markets, kind of wherever you want to go. I'd love to hear some of just
Sure.
your wisdom. Like, what are some of those lessons you've learned in the past or recently that folks might want to hear from you?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot, and from kind of the inception, I think it starts with our clients a lot of times around wanting to acquire. There was a period of time that we went through recently where there was a lot of focus on acquiring offices. That was the way to improve profitability, and everyone's talking EBITDA and all of those words. And if we could find a cash flowing office, plug it in, and there you go, without thinking about, hey, how are we going to integrate this practice, or what do we need, where are the pitfalls potentially between the point where we sign an LOI and we plug it into our organization. What do we need to do? And so I think for us, we help a lot of our clients on buy-side diligence to really understand what drives success in the practice they're looking at, where the adjustments should be. We dig into, hopefully they do have something like dental intelligence, but we get into their KPIs and then assess them and then show them what this practice might look like under the P&L that they operate under within the organization. So, here's the arbitrage that may or may not occur. But then we peel it back to say, in order to do so, these are the changes that need to take place within the organization. Or, here's the structure that we need within our DSO to be able to support this new office or group of offices in order to maintain and then start to add profitability to them. So, you can't do that without the data, right? You need to be able, in order to understand that, you need to understand the data, both of your organization, the potential or the organization you're potentially acquiring or office, and then make sure that it speaks together from a data perspective. So that's one of my favorite things, because I think it's very eye-opening to our clients to start to understand kind of the perspective that it's not just about, hey, there's this office that's kind of close to us. I see it as a real big opportunity. There's a broker that says how great this opportunity is. It's kind of cheap, if you will. I always say that it's cheap for a reason. So let's figure out why. And without data, that's impossible to do. So, that's a big area that we're helping our clients in. And I think as we've kind of transitioned out of that, hey, let's acquire. It's about growing profitability within our organization. So, I think some of the help that we've provided is really taking a look at some of the lower performing groups within a portfolio, if you will, to really assess what would be meaningful about removing them. Should we sell an office? Should we, at what point do you say, hey, I've got to cut bait? And so being able to look at the performance of that office, understanding, not only the cash flow that's going to maintain this practice, but also the emotional drain it's causing, the brain drain. Like if 20% of your offices are taking up 80% of your time, and you're not going to be able to get to a result that 80% of your time would be better focused on your top performing offices. How do we improve that? What does that timeline look like? And then is it worth investing in, or might we look to kind of jettisoning this office?
Yeah, that's interesting. it's interesting you bring up kind of the sunk cost fallacy, like this idea that if we've invested so much in something that we can't step away from it. Does that come up like fairly often with groups, with like, I actually have talked to a couple of dentists recently who have, had a successful first practice, had a successful second practice, and then somewhere between 3 and 5, they hit this wall where all of a sudden they realized their systems weren't as scalable as they thought, or some of their success wasn't the things they believed it actually was. So they end up having kind of a big failure, and they have to make that decision. Now, some of them hold on for a long time. One of them I talked to recently moved on surprisingly quick. Like, he bought a practice that was underperforming and realized very quickly, oh, I do not have the chops for this like I thought I did, and moved on. So is that something that comes up like more than I think it does, probably?
I think it comes up, frequently
Mm-hmm.
from the perspective of what do we have to do? What is it going to take to get this practice to where we need it to be in order to right size our P&L, in order to make it viable and profitable moving forward? Because at the end of the day, that's where we need to get to. And so, yes, part of what we do is to design the path that's going to get us to profitability, and then sit down and have a serious conversation with the client of, can we do this?
Yeah.
This is going to take X amount of patients above and beyond what we're currently seeing. So can we create more patient visits? Can
Yeah, I
we
was actually just going
create
to ask that. Is that typically, in my mind, that's probably one of the biggest ones where you might say, hey, we're going to call it quits, is if patient base count is really low. Like, when you look at like actual active patients, because you could have thousands of patients of records, so to speak. But when you look at ones that have actually been in the business in the last 12 to 18 months, it might be low. If it's a couple hundred, then it's like, I could see those ones being like, hey, we got to, like, if we're bleeding patients, we got to pull the plug on this thing. But
Sure,
are
yeah,
you ever pulling the plug if it's like over 1,000, or is it like really, is that typically one of the big things that you're looking at when deciding to pull the plug or not?
yeah, I mean, I think it's patient flow for sure. It's
Yeah.
doctor performance. It's, what is our average production per patient? Do we have a is there an RCM issue? What are the issues that exist within this office? I mean, we don't rush to this decision. I do like to say, let's fail fast. But that doesn't mean before we assess the problems and then create a plan to improve it, and then assess that plan from a feasibility standpoint. So, again, to your point, patient visits, can we do marketing? What are we doing in marketing? Are we doing enough? And then what do we need to turn on from a marketing perspective in order to create this? Are they not coming back because the doctor, what is our treatment acceptance percentage? And we had kind of chatted a little bit about those metrics before we jumped on. So, are those at a healthy point? So we really do want to assess where the bleeding is coming from.
Yeah.
And we want to make sure that we're also going to treat the right cut, if you will.
Yep.
If we're pouring all of our effort into a place that's not going to drive results, where is it going to be best poured into? And then is there value there beyond kind of the stubborn nature that we have as business owners to say, I don't want to admit to failure. And I went through that too. I mean, I can tell you a personal story about my experience on the ownership side when we had an office that just wasn't going to be viable, and let it go for quite a bit of time, and then ultimately realized it wasn't. We closed it, and when I look back, that was one of the most educational experiences of my life and my career, and I have that battle scar to take with me to my current client base and really talk through it from a personal perspective of having gone through it, and the immense relief once it's gone.
That would, we don't have a ton of time left. That would be a fun podcast to do sometime, is get some folks together and talk about all the battle scar lessons that we've learned as we've worked to scale businesses or act as an entrepreneur. Like, I just had like 3 or 4 little lessons come in, even like like I've got some rental properties and lessons I've learned, like, what do you do when rent is late? Like, there's just lots of lessons you can learn from battle scars that are so helpful moving forward. Now we're coming to the top. Eric, this has been so fun. I could chat with you for a long time. I always ask every single one of my guests this question. So I'm going to ask you the same thing. And that is, what does growth in dentistry mean to you?
I think growth in dentistry comes with a certain amount of responsibility to educate everyone around us, our patients, our teams, to be able to understand that the end goal of what we're trying to do is really care for patients. At the end of the day, we're in a healthcare business that our result needs to be the best for the patient that's in front of us so that they are well taken care of and ultimately get what they need. And so if we're in, so I think from a growth in dentistry perspective, if we are continuing to focus on the patient results, we'll be fine. If it turns into more of a business and how do we maximize profits, we're going to go down a bad path. So as long as we stay focused on the patient and the end result, I think success will follow.
Yeah, I love that response. One of the things I've been thinking about lately, as companies build to scale, I think there can be a common from both the outside and the inside comment that, we can make mistakes where it's like people will claim like, oh, well, they're making just a short-sighted decision to sell this business. And what's interesting is as financial markets have improved, in general, the reality is that the best decision for a business for its like financial profitability should be the best decision for it long term. And I love your response. Focusing on the patient will always be the right decision for the business. Like that will create long-term financial viability. Now, what does that mean? That could mean a lot of things, right? That also means we have to compensate the right way. We have to have the right fee structure in order for the business to stay healthy. Because if the business isn't healthy, then we can't take care of patients, right? So I'm going to like throw a couple layers on there with that response because I think that's important for people to hear. But 100%, like I totally agree with that response. Great answer, Eric. Well, thank you for joining me today. It's been a blast. Love what you and the Skytale team are doing. If you guys don't know about Skytale or want to learn more, Eric, what's the best way for folks to reach out to you?
Yeah, skytalegroup.com is our website. I would invite anyone out there to take a look. We do consulting and investment banking. Very robust team full of industry executives that have similar stories as mine. And so I would love for people to come and check us out. We have a podcast too, so you're more than welcome to listen in there.
What's the podcast name? We can throw it in the show notes for sure.
Skytale Insights, I think we're calling it these days.
Great.
And we work in the dental and aesthetic industries are the two primary focuses for us. And so, come to the website. I'm Eric.Pastan at skytalegroup.com if you want to email me directly, or you can link up through LinkedIn or whatever makes sense. But love having conversations. And, to your point, I could talk on and on for hours. So if anyone wants, I'm available.
Sweet. Well, thank you, Eric, once again for joining. And thank you to all you listeners out there for joining for another episode of the Growth in Dentistry podcast. My name is Steve Jensen, your host. Keep growing. We'll talk soon.